Hi, my name is Aashna Thakkar. I'm the head of audience engagement at Reclaim the Frame. Reclaim the Frame champions marginalized perspectives in cinema, connecting with audiences through community building and conversation. Today, I'm joined by the brilliant Erica Tremblay, director of Fancy Dance. Thank you for this moving and important film, and congratulations on your first fiction feature.
Thank you so much.
Um, you've made feature documentaries like Heartland, A Portrait of Survival, and In the Turn, and more recently, a fictional short in 2019, also starring the incredible Lily Gladstone called Little Chief, as well as executive story editor at or on shows like Dark Winds and a personal favorite, Reservation Dogs, and more. Those are just some of the highlights. Yeah, thank you again for being here. Yeah, I'd love to start off by asking what inspired you to leap into a feature fiction and why with this particular story.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's always been my dream to be a feature filmmaker. It's something that I've always wanted to do. And for all sorts of reasons, I took a very long, windy path to get there. But after making the short film Little Chief that you referenced with Lily, I just knew that that's what I wanted to do. And so I called Lily up and I said, hey, people are really interested in this short film. How would you feel about making a feature that was in a similar world with a similar character? And they said yes, and I was so excited. And I was in a language immersion program at that time, so I was studying my ancestral language for 8 hours a day, and then at night I was writing. And so I was very inspired by my language learning while I was kind of coming up with the idea of Fancy Dance. And then I called up another Indigenous writer that I had met through a Sundance lab, and I said, hey, I'm writing this feature film. I've got an outline and I've got some pages written. Would you take a look and maybe jump on board and do this with me? So Michiana Elise, read everything and said yes. And so the two of us embarked on writing the screenplay together, which was, a really thrilling experience. And yeah, and then, once the script was done and it was just, let's make it, let's find a way to make it. But I'm so grateful that I was able to kind of make the jump from the advertising publishing world that I was working in into filmmaking and now writing and directing on television and in the feature space. It's been a whirlwind few years, but I'm so thrilled and excited to be doing what I've always wanted to do and be kind of like living out my dream in real time.
Mhm. Yeah, no, that's huge. Congrats. You touched on the cast a little bit, and the entire cast was such a joy to watch. And I'm interested in hearing about what you were looking for in the process of casting. Obviously, working with Lily again, but also finding the right young person to star alongside them and having them, yeah, be scene partners. What were you looking for?
Yeah, casting this film was really wonderful. It's great that we're, in a time where we're casting real Native people to play Native characters written by Native people. And we knew very early on that casting was going to be a huge piece, especially because we were casting like a young Native person, like a child essentially. And so when we got our very first grant monies, before we had a financier, before we had like a green light to even move forward with the film, we brought on Mid Thunder Casting, who I had worked with on previous projects and had worked with on Reservation Dogs. And we set out to find Roki. And, we did a very large North American wide search and we watched hundreds of tapes of these really glorious, wonderful young Indigenous actors. But I hadn't quite found the person that was Roki. Like we'd seen so much talent, but it wasn't quite the Roki that we were looking for. And I just happened to be working on a television called Dark Winds, and we were looking for a young pregnant teen to
Mhm.
be in the TV show. And Isabel's tape came across my desk, and she looked way too young to play the pregnant teen that we were looking for. But I was like, she looks just the right age to play Roki. And so I called up our casting director, Stacey Rice, and I said, hey, listen, there's this young girl that I saw, Isabel Deroy-Olson. And so as soon as she read and I was able to jump on a Zoom with her, I just knew that she was the one. And it was so incredible because, you know, when she first arrived, you know, her and Lily were in pre-production together doing dance classes and language classes, and they just clicked right away. And they were like pranking each other and pranking the crew, and like they were Jackson Roki, like just their spirit. And I think that the love and like the kinship and relationship that they were forming throughout the screening or the shooting of the film, you know, really came across in their performances together, and their chemistry is like so real in real life that it like overflowed in this beautiful way in their performances. And so we're so grateful to the both of them for bringing their generosity and their talent to this film, and you know, and then casting all of the characters around them. You know, what a joy to work with such incredible Indigenous talent, and you know, the rest of the cast as well. We were so lucky to have such, you know, wonderful professionals that showed up to give their love to fancy dance.
Yeah, no, you can definitely tell on screen that the chemistry was right. It all, felt very natural to watch. You mentioned some other elements that I was going to bring up about the film that I noticed specifically was language, specifically Cayuga and dance as well. Can you talk through how the cast and crew prepared and cared for the scenes where they were speaking the language and dancing? And I heard as I was doing my research that especially with the language, there aren't many speakers left, and I think to me that added a whole nother layer of urgency and weight to the messaging of the film. So I think that was really special. Yeah, if you could speak to how they prepared with.
Yeah, certainly. So, right now there are less than 20 first language speakers of Cayuga, which means that the language is essentially classified as you know, endangered to extinct. And there's been an incredible effort to revitalize the language. And I was so lucky to be able to do a 3-year, you know, full-time language immersion program up in Six Nations in Ontario, Canada. And, you know, while I was doing my language immersion program, uh, we were learning familial words. So like the word for mother is knoha, and the word for auntie is knoha'a, which means small mother or your other mother. And as I was learning the language, just this like this matriarchy and this beautiful, you know, matrilineal like culture was unfolding, because you know, our everyday life has been so steeped in misogyny and white supremacy and the patriarchy that sometimes, you know, it's hard to imagine what my culture looked like pre-contact. But it was coming out, and this relationship to it was so vibrant in the language. Whereas, like, you know, if you don't know the gender of a person, it's just automatically she. If it's a group of mixed gender people, they're all she's. And, you know, it was kind of in the way that it applied gender to the language was the exact opposite of how English you know, is flipped the other way. And so I was so inspired to imagine two young people who spoke the language fluently, and where matrilineal kinship was like the cornerstone of culture and society and the cornerstone of the story. And so, you know, I was extremely influenced by learning the language, and extremely influenced by spending, you know, hours with elders at soup lunches, and listening to them speak their language and our language. And how can how can my language learning be a part of the revitalization process? And so I probably wouldn't be the best teacher. I probably wouldn't like be the best person like to like do academic research around the revitalization, but I'm a filmmaker, so I knew that I could bring that language and bring the beautiful words, cadence, grammar into media, and into a film. And so we took very seriously, there's a long history of just using nonsense words to represent or replicate Indigenous languages. We wanted just to make sure that it was right and that it was perfect and that everything sounded and was correct. And so I worked very closely with language speakers to translate the film. I brought this wonderful woman, Kisa Parker, who I had done my language immersion program with. She came down to Oklahoma. She was on set. The cast did 2 weeks of language immersion before we even started filming the film. One of the things that we did, because, the language has been stunted in a way because it hasn't been used in everyday life since, the earlier part of the last century. And so things haven't evolved and there aren't words for everything that we have in like modern day life. And so one of the things that was very important to me was that the language was used on the set. And so I worked with language keepers to come up with the set calls. So like action and sound speeds and cut and moving on and all of these things that you hear on a set. And so we translated those words and created words for the ones that we didn't have in the language. And we printed out these lanyards. And on the first day, we passed them out to the cast and crew. And by the third day, everyone knew the words by heart. And we were actively using the language as part of the filmmaking process. And it was important to me that that was part of our process because I didn't want the language to just be a gimmick in the film. Like I wanted it to feel like the language was part of our coming together and a part of our process. And so yeah, and then on the dancing side of things, dance and movement are so important in our communities and cultures. And I wanted Roki to have a relationship with her mother. Like her mother's not in the film like as a character per se, like physically, but I wanted her to be in the film as a character. And so the fact that Roki is trying to get to this powwow, is trying to get there because that, the powwow essentially in some ways represents Towie in the film for both Jax and Roki. And, along with doing language immersion for our 2 weeks of prep, Isabel and Lily also did dance lessons. And so we had this incredible championship powwow dancer, Holly Gray, that came in and was working with them to dance. And it's not about like learning steps, but they were just learning the dance and they were interpreting it in their own way. And so that was really wonderful, and working with Holly to make sure that their regalia was correct and that all of the things that we had there that were good. And the other piece of dance that was also really important in this film, was Towie worked at the strip club and she was a sex worker. And so, as a former sex worker myself, as a former, dancer in a strip club myself, I really wanted to represent Towie as a woman who was doing anything and everything that she could to provide safety and to provide a good life for her child. And, when I was working in the sex industry, I knew lots of great moms and I knew lots of women who were working and providing great, had a great family. And so it was important for me also to incorporate that sort of dancing. And, I love the moment that Roki goes into her mom's bedroom and finds her mom's, work suitcase and opens it up and finds this jacket that represents not only, her connection to her mother, but also, bridging the gap between like what we do and how we live in a modern world and how we take that and how that influences our culture. And I, remember when we were talking about that scene and we were working out that scene with Isabel, I was like, when you're putting on that jacket, imagine that that's your mom hugging you. And you're going to tie that and you're not ever going to take it off throughout till the end of the, you're never going to take it off. And because you feel her presence there with you. And we were very careful not to see the jacket kind of go into full flight until the very end of the film when she dances and it takes flight. So yeah, language and dance and, just incorporating and applying those in a modern context were very important goals for us.
Yeah, no, that's really beautiful. Um, and as you are bringing this film into the UK, what are you hoping folks outside the Seneca-Cayuga communities and Indigenous communities, and even people outside of a North American context, take away from this film?
Yeah, I mean, first and foremost, when we were developing this film and making this film, we had our Indigenous communities in mind, which I think is what is so beautiful about this film is that it's about a very specific place. It's about a very like specific group of people, but it has these global themes that everyone can watch and everyone has had loss in their life and everyone has experienced these sorts of things, and maybe not in this context and in this application, but they can hopefully empathize with what Jax and Roki are going through. So, first and foremost, we hope that Indigenous audiences just feel that hug. Like we want our Indigenous audiences around the world to recognize that this film is for them and made by people like them. And for us, like that was the most important thing. And it's funny because like I don't think we were thinking past that as much. Like we were like, how can we make a film that Indigenous people around the world are going to feel like validated by, or feel seen by, or feel heard by. And so, first and foremost, that's what we really hope that the film accomplishes, because there are so few there are so few films and so few TV shows out there that we can turn to for that. Just have been so few things made by Indigenous people for Indigenous people, unfortunately. And so, past that, I think, one of the things that I hope that people outside of those communities find with the film is, just maybe some empathy or a new understanding of their Indigenous neighbors, and how they especially in the United States, how they have an intrinsic relationship to the Indigenous people in the country, and they have there's an important empathy that needs to kind of come to life in order for us to find a path forward. And I think that people around the world that also live in spaces where they have Indigenous neighbors and Native neighbors, I think it's important for everyone to think about how they can be better neighbors, think about how they can jump on board to help these Indigenous communities thrive. Certainly in the US, like we need support to continue fighting for sovereignty. um, you know, finding ways to support revitalization of languages, finding ways to support ending violence in Indigenous spaces. And so I think there are a lot of things that this film can help. Go Google things and find out more about the issues that are still facing Indigenous people today, every day. And genocide is ongoing. Colonization is ongoing. These things are still actively happening around the world. And I hope that people can watch this story about these two women and potentially find a new relationship to how they can engage with these systems, and how they can engage with helping, in them, and supporting their Indigenous neighbors and their efforts for safety and justice.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I think this film will definitely inspire anyone who's not super, familiar with, things that go on with Indigenous communities. Or I think, yeah, I think personally, I love that it didn't have to explain anything. It was just, the characters kind of living their lives. But I think for audiences who might not be familiar, I think it definitely will inspire to to go home and research a little bit more. So I think it was me told. Um, and lastly, what's next for you? Do you have any other projects coming up that you can talk about?
Yeah, so I'm currently working on Dark Winds. I wrote on the third season. I'm directing an episode, and I've got some other television development that's lined up. I I'm really interested in kind of jumping into the genre space. Like I'm excited to explore like Indigenous characters and genre. So I am right now working to adapt a novella written by this incredible Indigenous artist, and that will be a feature. It's a horror novella, so I'm really excited about that. And then Michiana Elise and I are teaming back up to write a thriller, so we're currently working on a script together right now. And then yeah, I've got a TV series that's currently in development. So yeah, lots of stuff, really busy. It's really kind of uh a wave it like feels like that I'm on, and I'm sitting up here on this wave and just hoping to work on, you know, more projects and collaborate with more, you know, Indigenous folks. And it's a really exciting time. You know, I have so many peers that are also working on so many things, and I'm so excited for their projects. And you know, we're kind of all in this together as we push ourselves up this colossal mountain to Hollywood. And you know, I've been so lucky to write and direct on, you know, shows like Reservation Dogs. And so I have so many amazing you know, mentors and peers and partners. And so it's an exciting time. So I hope that we all get to enjoy a lot more Indigenous cinema. So yeah, all the decision makers out there, write us some checks, you know, call us up. We want to make more stuff. So hopefully lots more on the horizon.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for joining us, and congratulations again on Fancy Dance. I'm so excited for more audiences to watch the film. Yeah, thanks so much.
Thank you, Nyawa.